If you love the Godfather movies, then you'll love Take the Cannoli, the Godfather podcast. Each week, we take a few minutes to talk about anything and everything Godfather, including business and leadership lessons from the Godfather. Here's your consigliere, Lou Bortone.
Godfather Podcast, Episode 6, The Miracle on Mulholland. By the late 60s, the legendary star, once considered the greatest actor in the world, was an overweight, out-of-work, washed-up has-been. Worse yet, after a string of bad movies and a reputation for being difficult to work with, he was considered box office poison. No studio in Hollywood would touch him. So when Godfather author Mario Puzo and director Francis Ford Coppola told the studio execs at Paramount that they wanted the once great 47-year-old Marlon Brando to play the Godfather, the suggestion was met with ridicule. The very mention of Brando's name sent Paramount owner Hurricane Charlie Bloodhorn into a fit of rage. Studio head Robert Evans had said, "Anyone but Brando. Marlon is as dead could be." Another Paramount exec insisted that Brando would tank the movie. "He's washed up. He's finished," they warned Bloodhorn. In fact, studio president Stanley Jaffe had a meeting with Coppola and told him, quote, "As long as I'm president of the studio, Marlon Brando will not be in this picture, and I will no longer allow you to discuss it."
I remember he was having a lot of problems. Every time he mentioned Brando's name, one of the executives is the right word, said, "If you mention his name again, you're out."
And the guy who was then the president said, "As president of Paramount Pictures," these are his exact words, "as president of Paramount Pictures, Marlon Brando will never appear in this motion picture."
Let me lay it on the line for you and your boss, whoever he is. Johnny Fontaine will never get that movie.
I remember I just sort of fell on the floor and I said to them, at least give me a chance. They're all right. If, number one, he does the movie for nothing, if he does a screen test, and if he puts up a bond guaranteeing that none of his shenanigans will cause a delay, you can consider him.
Now today it's hard to imagine anyone but Brando in the role of Don Vito Corleone, but at the time, everyone involved had an opinion about who should play the Godfather. Charlie Bloodhorn wanted Charles Bronson. Robert Evans proposed Burt Lancaster. Anthony Quinn and Ernest Borgnine were interested in the role, as was TV star Danny Thomas, who wanted the role so badly that he was considering buying a controlling interest in Paramount Pictures just to cast himself as the Don. But Puzo saw Marlon Brando as the lead character when he wrote the novel, and he had even sent Brando a handwritten note asking him to consider the part. Coppola agreed, and he fought Paramount fiercely until he finally wore them down. Studio president Jaffe eventually considered to at least consider Brando, but only if 3 nearly impossible conditions were met. First, the actor would be required to put up a bond of $1 million to ensure that his temperament or antics would not delay the movie's production. Second, Brando would have to forego his usual salary and agree to do the film for next to nothing. And third, and most unusual for a star of Brando's magnitude, he'd have to screen test for the role. Now, Jaffe knew that Brando refused to be tested for any role, so he figured that would be the end of it. But the conditions gave Francis just enough of an opening to try to find a way to convince Brando to consider the role. Brando, once considered the greatest of his generation, had vowed never to act again, let alone play a mafia don. He had received Puzo's letter, but he had never even read the book. However, Brando was by now deep in debt and dependent on Valium, and in the middle of his 3rd divorce. Brando's assistant, Alice Marchek, had read The Godfather, and she knew that he'd be perfect for the part. She also knew that Brando had hit rock bottom and desperately needed the role. So she began a long campaign trying to convince him to consider the role. Director Coppola knew that anyone who played the Godfather had to possess star power of the highest order. He'd say, quote, "The Godfather needs an actor of such magnetism, such charisma, that just walking into the room could be an event." For Coppola, that meant luring Brando out of seclusion to take the part. A dinner was arranged between Coppola and Brando at the famed Chianti restaurant on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. and the director went to work on seducing Brando to take the role. After the dinner, Brando was intrigued, but there was still the little matter of the required screen test. Now, Coppola admitted that he was, quote, scared shitless of Brando, and he knew he couldn't ask Brando to audition. Instead, Francis came up with the idea of doing what he called a makeup test, just a couple of people with a home camera experimenting a bit. The word screen test was never mentioned. So in January 1971, Coppola and a tiny crew arrived at Brando's sprawling house atop the Hollywood Hills at 12,900 Mulholland Drive, home movie camera in hand, to do the screen test that wasn't a screen test. The whole thing was a clandestine mission, and the small crew was sworn to secrecy. The Paramount execs had no idea what Coppola was up to.
And I called up Brandon, whom I didn't know, and had made that contact and said, "Oh, what if I do some makeup tests?" I said, to get around the screen test. And I went and I brought Italian cheese and cigars and stuff. And we were just shooting, and he saw the cheese and went like that, and he started to take his hair and put shoe polish on. He says, "It's like a bulldog." And put some on. He goes, "I want to have, And he's doing this right there, and I'm shooting it, and then he started going. He put Kleenex in his mouth, and he had black. It's remarkable to see.
Now, Coppola had brought along some props like prosciutto and cheese and cigars that he hoped might help Brando get into character. Eventually, Brando entered his living room in a Japanese kimono with his hair long and blonde. He was soft-spoken and a bit tentative, but to everyone's astonishment, Brando slowly began his transformation into Vito Corleone. First, he tied back his blonde hair into a ponytail and darkened his hair with black shoe polish. Then he stuffed some Kleenex into his cheeks to give himself jowls like a bulldog. He put on a bit more shoe polish on his upper lip to add a mustache, then lowered his voice to a gravel-like mumble. Brando improvised and experimented with his posture and his mannerisms until he was ready. Then Coppola's 16mm camera started to roll. One of the crew read with Brando as they witnessed the 47-year-old actor morph into the aging mafia chief. Everyone in the room was astonished. According to Coppola, Brando had inhabited the essence of Don Corleone. His consummate transformation was stunning and complete. "I knew that what Brando had done on tape was extraordinary," said Coppola. So Francis then took a gamble that could have had him fired, but it might also finally settle the matter on Brando. He went over the heads of everyone at the studio of LA, got on the next plane to New York City with Brando's tape under his arm, and went straight to Gulf and Western's headquarters to see Charlie Bloodhorn. Gulf and Western owned Paramount Pictures, so Charlie was basically the boss of all bosses. Coppola got to New York and played the tape for Bloodhorn. "Francis, who is this?" Bloodhorn asked in his thick Austrian accent. Then it hit him. No, absolutely not. I don't want this crazy Brando." But before Bloodhorn could storm out of the room, he found himself transfixed by what producer Al Ruddy would dub the miracle on Mulholland. Bloodhorn saw Brando become Don Corleone right before his eyes. "Wait, this is terrific!" Everyone else at the studio who witnessed the transformation were equally shocked and impressed. It was spectacular. The battle for Brando had been won by Coppola and Puzo, though now Francis was on even shakier ground with Evans and Jaffe, since he had made an end run around them by going straight to Charlie Bloodhorn. Still, the gamble paid off, and the rest, as they say, is movie history. However, the epic casting battles for the film were just beginning. But more about that next time on the Godfather podcast. Join us each week to watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, ciao for now.
Thanks for listening to Take the Cannoli, the Godfather podcast with Lou Bortone. Join us again next time if you know what's good for you. Capiche?